Hello, too close. Hi, my name is Nathan. I'm here to do talk on building AAA environments at scale. See if I can get the clicker to work. It's not working. Technical difficulties. It's not. There we go. Excellent. So, hi again. My name is Nathan McKenzie. I'm the lead environment artist at Shark Mob London. Previously, I worked on the Forza Horizon IP with credits on 4 and 5. I started off as a contract artist working on terrain, and then I dabbled into other disciplines. I then ended my time at Playground Games leading the roads on Horizon 5, which is the image here, and now I'm at Shark Mob London. So today I'm going to be discussing ways in which we can achieve AAA environment art standards at scale. So what does this mean exactly? Well, we're going to be going over a framework of sorts to enable us to create AAA art. We'll be going over team building and team structure and what that means to the project, the different stages of a project and how they relate to environment art and how to navigate them. Handling hurdles and the unknowns within, and the team and the project. Hopefully, altogether attaining AAA standards in a short amount of time. It's worth noting that everything that I'll be talking about today is in relation to my own experience and an IP that is well established and there's only one way to work. So we're going to go over some team stuff at the start, as it'll be kind of relevant later on. So when it comes to building the team, the first thing you need to do is identify what you're looking for in a team. And when it comes to building, identify what you're looking for in the team in terms of culture, as well as the needs of the project. It's important to establish a structure within the team and determine the groups that the team can be split into. The earlier that you do this, the better. Try to identify where your artist can fit in, and likewise to the individual artist, try to think, is there an area where you like to work more than others? This structure will be important in order to divide the work out correctly for the project ahead. So let's take a look at a structure that I've known to work in the past. And there's a wee picture of the team in Shark Mob. So team structure. It all starts with the art director, and then this leads into the lead environment artist. From this point, it will flow into the team structure that I mentioned before. In this case, I've divided the team into disciplines. Now, terrain, assets, foliage, composition, geology, and any other sort of project specifics. Each of these teams would then have a lead of themselves to be a sheriff for the lead artist. And then within each discipline, you would have the artists. It's important in this instance to have a singular person to bring all the disciplines together, i.e. the lead, and push the art director's vision. As well as this, you may have a dedicated producer for the environment team as well. So the project structure, each project is divided into a few stages. And then each of these stages can be broken down again into milestones and then into sprints if you work that way. So first we have concept. This is where we find out what the project actually is. Pre-pro, where we come up with ideas, pipelines, and benchmark assets. Production, where we put those pipelines and benchmark assets into practice. And then shutdown. In this phase, we polish the work that has been done and then fix bugs that have been found in the game through testing. So concept, what is this stage? Well, this stage is all about finding the project. What is the project? What is the art direction? What is the purpose? Is there something special you want to pull off? What are the areas that need investigating? What tech is needed to pull off the project? It's all about exploration. You may not know how the team works at this point. You might not know what the team needs to do, but this is when you look into how you want to do it for the project. During concept, you are creating tests, prototypes, art direction benchmarks, investigations into ideas for new pipelines. One of the big things to look into in this stage is what we mentioned before, which is the team structure, and if you want to work in disciplines. Or some other structure. So take this time to think about it and start to plan this out, and ultimately get the team together. Investigations. So investigations, there's nothing more important in this phase than solid investigations into how you want to work all up. So pipelines, new ideas, ways of working, best practice, get this stuff down in writing, get it all signed off at some point so there's no guesswork later on. And also get your tech requests in from those investigations, at least the major ones, the ones you know you'll need that will take the longest. You may not know what these will be, but get the obvious ones in when you can. A final thing to mention in this in concept is, so how do you actually work in concept? So you don't usually have anything concrete in this phase, so it can become a little scattered sometimes. It's important, even in this stage, to have structure, set up gates for everything. An investigation can have several gates to give people deadlines and structure. Review anything that's done and ultimately get it signed off. Prioritize everything and work on everything high priority down, and fit it into a schedule so no one is working aimlessly. Finally, feel free to work items up manually in this phase, as you won't have the tech to do it any other way. Then look into how to actually proceduralize it later on, and then pass that manual art to tech art as an example of what you're looking for, rather than just have them guess. At the end of it, though, this stage is all about exploration. You might not land on something that makes it to the final game, but everything you do should always be guided to the point that you might use it. Pre-production. So what does this mean? Well, you have your ideas from concept. You have ideas on what and how you're going to create everything you want. So let's get creating. You want to start working on creating your assets from your concept findings. This will give you some timings to put forward for project planning and schedules. Something that we did on Forza Horizon 5 is we created a more or less art-only vertical slice, so more of a horizontal slice, if you will. We created a part of the final game in the world using the timings that we'd found from before. So if the timings are good, then we can move forward. And if not, then we look to adjust what we're doing to try and get them down to what we needed. Another reason for doing this vertical slice is to test out our pipelines and processes. This will show us whether we need to investigate further into the tech or the art and prepare us for the production phase. Some light production things to note about this vertical slice: it should be limited in size so that all the goals you want to achieve can be completed. So set yourself up for success with this, not failure. It should be scoped and scheduled from start to finish, start date to end date, using the timings from your investigations, even if it's rough numbers. This will give you a full schedule for it, and everyone will know when to expect everything coming in. A final note regarding production is to add contingency into the schedule. So set time where nothing is scheduled to be created. This will solve for increased timings, sick, and annual leave. This can also be repeated into the production phase as well. It's worth noting that in this way of working, we do not work in sprints, only milestones. Therefore, we can have end of milestone deliverables rather than having something finished by the end of a sprint. This will be touched on again in the production phase when we get to that. While working on the vertical slice or pre-production in general, you should be working assets to benchmark quality using manual or procedural methods. You then have them signed off by direction and leadership. This will set the stage for what all assets going forward will look like. Generally, in the future, if an asset is under review and it's not liked, then you should be able to point to your benchmark asset as to why it's not liked, be it artistic or technical. It's very important to get this sign off in writing an email or review notes so that people have the chance at the moment, at that time, to object, and then you can bring up 2 years later if you need to, as a lot's going on and things can be forgotten. At the end of this stage in the project, you should have benchmark assets to base all your disciplines on, timings on how long it takes to create these assets, and therefore a production scope against the entire project. All of the tech you need to do your job going into production, or at the very least, a roadmap of when the tech will come in. A hiring plan to make sure you ramp up at the right time, and then teams in place to work within your desired structure. I want to talk a little bit more here on benchmarking and specifically benchmarking at scale. This is important because you'll create something confined and small in scale, and everyone thinks it looks great. And then you put it in the game across an open world project and something immediately looks off. It's just not quite right. We're more directed towards things you will see a lot on the screen at once. Bodies of foliage, large terrain, rock composition, this kind of thing. The asset looks good, so why does it not look good at scale? Generally, this would be created by some kind of procedural method. So we should be able to utilize other procedural methods to help us take it that bit further. As well as this, you'll want to keep a close relationship with lighting and tech art, as these areas will help dictate the standards for the asset, such as PBR color, work, and performance limitations. When we're tweaking work at this stage and scale, we should be looking at what can get us the big wins first. Looking at the big picture. So let's take a look at an example, say a collection of foliage like a forest. You're thinking this looks pretty nice. You feel you have a solid narrative in relation to gameplay and your reference. Art direction is happy. Let's sign this off. Then it gets spread out over a large area. And it looks like this. Not quite right, a bit boring even. The broad scale narrative is missing because we were focusing on the small scale narrative. So let's go back to those big wins I mentioned and see what we can do. So in this image, I procedurally taken the height and world space and gradually changed the foliage color. Or maybe you could take a very small world scale texture and color sections. Top left, you have a spring palette. Bottom right, you have an autumnal palette. And in the middle is more of a summer palette. Each section having its own random values as well. And then let's see what happens when we put them together. You can see we now have a nice variation across a large space, and we have brought up the large scale narrative back in line with the smaller scale narrative. Let's bring the original back up to see the difference. So for this to work well and cheaper, I would also suggest grayscaling the foliage canopies so that you can then colorize them later on and have more control at large scale. So production, what is production? So as many of you will know, production is the stage where the bulk of the game is created. You're using all your pipelines, investigations, and benchmarks you created to produce the entire game, which is why it's so important to nail that stuff before you get to this stage so you can go on and get making the game. Now, obviously, it's not all going to be plain sailing at this stage, and the sooner you plan for this, the better. There are a few things you can do to help mitigate this. The first thing, similar to the pre-pro stage, is to pencil in all the tasks for the entirety of the phase from start to end date to make sure everything fits in. I probably recommend this is all done prior to going into this stage, but it will help forecast the rest of production. Now, it doesn't need to be super detailed plan, but have something in. For instance, you could have a task under Artist 1 that says terrain work in Area 1, and then break that down once you get to the milestone. As long as all the milestones are planned out with tasks, this will work. Another thing that you can add into your milestones is a week or two of what I mentioned before, contingency. Again, same as pre-pro. Remember, this is just time set aside for nothing. This will take into consideration sick days and annual leave without having to know when anyone is actually going to be off and then needing to take care of that anytime someone puts in a request. And you'll still get your deliverables just at the end of the milestone, not from a sprint. If an artist doesn't use this contingency, then you move it to the next milestone. You don't fill it up with work at that moment. You wait until near the end, and then you make sure you have enough time for the remainder of all their annual leave, and then you look at what else you want to achieve with this time. Any polish items that could use some more time, additional items that could be done, etc. It's worth noting that from my experience, using sprints to work with environment art just does not work. Tasks are usually more free flowing, take longer than a sprint to do, and a number of other reasons, which is why we switched to using full milestones as the driving production method, along with contingency to account for the unknown. Now, sometimes you can plan and plan, but something is still going to come out and surprise you. With this type of stuff, you just need to triage, prioritize the work, and check if it actually does need done. Maybe push back a little on who's asking for the work if you can't fit it in. Push it back to the next phase if it's more of a polish item. If it does need done, then put a task force together and tackle it fast and use a bit of that contingency that you planned out. The last thing I'll mention about production is to review the work all the time. Hold weekly reviews with your peers, hold weekly reviews with your lead, and yes, again, weekly reviews with your art director to get the work signed off and get your feedback in before you finish the task. Shutdown. So what is shutdown? Shutdown is pretty different in every studio, but this is the way that I know and have participated in before. So you may have noticed that I haven't actually mentioned bugs up until now. So in this stage, you can split up your milestones up into polish and bug fixed, depending on the data. Now, polish milestones are there to do just that. Act on feedback from art directors and other leadership and polish the work that has already been done. Production, that should have been the end of all new work being created. So you have these polished milestones, and then you go into sole bug fix milestones to round the project out. You spend your time trying to hit bug targets and have them found by either internal or external teams. These can range from a floating tree to the shader for every bridge in the game suddenly doesn't work, which has happened. So you've done most of your bugs and you're looking for more work. Well, there are usually quite a few other items to look into in this milestone. You could be playtesting the build to find more bugs to fix, or as you're nearing the end of the project, maybe there are some marketing items to help out on. Maybe it's E3 or some other conference like that. ArtStation, ArtBlast are also common to work up as well at this stage. And then there is just looking at the next big thing. Is it a DLC? Is it live work? Or is it the next full installment in the IP? So, conclusion, insights into attaining AAA environment art standards and the challenges you might face. Light production ideas that artists can use to develop their workflows and pipelines. Creating detail-rich worlds in a short amount of time, and advice around the team structure and culture. Hopefully, I've kind of touched on each point of this, and hopefully you've been able to take something away. Yeah, that's it for me. If there's any questions, then I can answer them. Yeah. Any questions at all? You go.
Cheers. Thank you for the talk, really good. As we step more into a world where proceduralism is kind of driving a lot of the bigger worlds that we develop, what are your ways to tackle those areas feeling repetitive and sort of the same after a while?
So I think it's really good when you're proceduralizing parts of the world, really nailing that visual for your proceduralized area. And then placing that across your world, seeing what that looks like, and then iterating again on that with those broad scale narrative that I touched on. Um, and then, like you said, yeah, it could that you could start seeing that the same thing all over the place. But then, what I would do would be to choose points of interest within that proceduralized area, and then work those up, and then work them up, work them up, work them up, and then hopefully, by doing that, you'll start to see less of the proceduralized area, and then some more kind of still procedural but handcrafted and procedural at the same kind of time. Um, but I think it's really just important on nailing the procedural look that's across the board first, and then yeah, picking your moments on what you want to kind of work up further. Yeah.
Just to follow on from that, then, when would you say that the procedural art needs to be at its top quality when in the cycle of the project? Because I'm assuming you'd want it before production sort of step, I would assume.
So ideally, yes, it would be before production, part of your kind of benchmarking. You'd be benchmarking your assets, and then while you're also benchmarking assets, you've got tech art and environment art together working together to benchmark the procedural work. It doesn't always happen. Things can go wrong, right? And I've seen it where the procedural work um, isn't even complete until like a week before shutdown. And that's just again, like, you're triaging, you're prioritizing the work that needs done. But yeah, ideally it would be before production going into that, so that you can just start placing things down and getting that work kind of straight off the bat. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh.
Hey, just wanted to check about how you balance a big team and breaking up work so that artists aren't tripping on one another. If you have to have multiple artists on a level or a big open space, what's your preferred methodology for doing that?
Sure. So my preferred methodology would be, again, to work in disciplines. So every artist or every team has their dedicated thing. So it could be foliage, it could be assets, it could be geology, terrain, that kind of thing. So they all have their individual things they're working on. And then it's up to the lead environment artist to make sure that all comes together as one. And then adding on that, in the actual world space, is breaking the world into areas that can be kind of sequestered off. So you've got like area 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's just sort of like grid the world out, and then coming up with a schedule from like I was saying, a schedule from start to finish, rather than just doing what am I going to do on this milestone and not thinking about future milestones. So it's actually planning that all out so that it almost waterfalls down, so that everything kind of lands when it needs to land. But doing this with the disciplines I've found to work, so that you rarely get people tripping over each other.
Cool, thanks.
Hi, I'm a lighting artist, and you touched on quite briefly just on the integration of lighting into the process there. Is there anything in particular in terms of concept discovery, pre-production, production that you called on in terms of the lighting team to make life a little bit easier for you in terms of PBR, PBL, and then the introduction of lighting into the production process?
Yeah, I guess the lighting team are integral in making sure that environment artists don't run amok with their colors, and making sure that everything is technically accurate as well as visually appealing. Making sure that there's spaces with neutral lighting, that the artists can work their assets up. And then also, on the opposite scale of that, there's more of the extreme lighting that you would maybe expect to see in the game, so they can also see what it looks like in that. And then working up tools and stuff to make sure that if you need to see what your asset looks like in every time of day. Making sure there's at least some kind of rudimentary time of day early on. Doesn't have to be finished. It won't be finished at that point. But just that there's something there for the artist to work up their assets on, and making sure that works. And I find that like the lead lighting artist or someone of that ilk would be in most of the reviews as well, just to make sure that everything's abiding by their rule sets that they've put in place as well, and just making sure that everything is kind of working together. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you for the talk. That was great. I was just wondering, for any artists who've not really done kind of open world stuff before, who are just kind of embarking on that journey, are there any tips that you can give to those who are, don't really know what their kind of niche is in that area yet? Or
so we also have people we're called generalists, whose job it was really to jump between groups and be more agile. And that's a completely fine thing to do if that's what you want. If you want to like dabble in everything, then I would say keep trying to do that, because it's not a bad thing. But yeah, as you go up into like large AAA projects, it really becomes important that you do sort of become disciplined in one area. And that's just all about exploration, using that concept phase to find yourself and find what it is that you're actually passionate about doing, and make sure that your lead knows that that's what you're passionate about. Try not get forced into a box. Make sure that you put yourself, half in that box, half out. Yeah, I just work through things and explore what it is that you actually want to do, but take the time to do it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, it was just on the point of having all these disciplined teams, and then kind of splitting them all off. How do you ensure that there's a cross-team collaboration and communication? And second to that, how do you ensure that the people who are doing the work still feel like they can give creative feedback on the other disciplines as well?
Sure. So it's all about holding those reviews with your peers. And when I say peers, it doesn't just necessarily mean in that discipline. Hold reviews with people outside your disciplines to make sure that their feedback is heard as well. And it's really important to just kind of make sure that the culture that you've established in your teams is that from the start. And if it's not, then it can be a bit harder to kind of foster that culture, right? But you just kind of stick at that way of working, be consistent in that way of working, and make sure, again, everyone's reviewing everything, and then make sure that your lead environment artist is doing their job and making sure that he's or she is bringing everyone else together. Yeah, very much it.
Thank you.
Hello. I was just wondering how level design works into this sort of timeline in terms of how that's handed off to environment and whether there's any blockers in that regard.
Sure. So with level design, usually they would actually be working before or while you're in concept. So they're rough boxing the world, like in Horizon sake, they were creating the road layouts. And then what would usually happen is once they finished an area, they would hold a review with the stakeholders plus the people that were going to be working on that area, so that at that moment when things were getting signed off in terms of level design, everybody had a moment to say whether they didn't like something. So artists would be able to say that, hey, I don't think that would work in real life. Can we change that? And then again, it's up to stakeholders to say, let's change that. The lead environment artists say, can we change that? And just make sure that everybody's working together. Generally, that does happen when you hold these sort of like cross-discipline reviews. People will be heard, but yeah, level design usually works well before environment art kind of starts coming in, but they're working during concept, and then they'll get their main world structure kind of signed off. And then environment art can come in and start whiteboxing things. And then again, even when environment art is still whiteboxing, they're talking to the level designer that owns that area as well. So like an area would have a level designer owner, an environment art owner, and then you just make sure that they've got constant communication, holding reviews with each other, running past each other if they think something might not work, like metrics and that kind of thing. Yeah, and then towards the end, you'll find level designer usually kind of just start tweaking things or adding like new things that don't really interfere with environment art. And other than that, they're starting to kind of gear up towards the next phase. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. I work in production. I wanted to ask you, how do you stop at some point the polishing phase once it starts spilling over to the next milestone? And when do you know how to stop polishing and take that all the way to bug fixing, in post-production?
I think that you need to set those boundaries from the start. You need to say, and you need to be comfortable with your leadership team on saying no, and saying that in order to ship this game, we have to stop polishing now, and we have to start bug fixing. And then if they're really adamant on that, then make sure that it's completely visible to them that if you want to carry on doing polish, you're going to lose this time in bug fix, and there's a possibility of still having bugs towards the end of the game, or maybe there's a way in which you can keep contractors on longer. I've seen a way where usually towards like polish and bug fix, we start the contractors, their contracts start kind of falling off. But maybe there's a way you could actually start keeping some of those people on in order to achieve that. But again, it's all about having like proper set deadlines in place and making sure that everybody, leadership and the team, know that those are like solid deadlines that we have to hit, and what happens if we don't hit them. And then it's up to the leadership team, kind of whether or not they want to go ahead with that.
Cheers.
We've spoken about AAA quality, and I'm curious, with all the kind of advancements in technology, what are, in your view, the kind of markers of true AAA quality at the moment, and where are those boundaries being pushed?
Yeah, I guess there's kind of different ways to look at that, right? You got your kind of go down your stylized to your realism route. I'm from a realism background, so I'll just kind of talk to that. But for me, for that, it's all about high fidelity, like with Nanite coming out for Unreal Engine 5. I think that kind of changed the game a little bit, and what people's expectations were, and how big that actually got with the general public as well, and that they are also know what's doable. So I think having really high fidelity, high geometry assets is one thing. Also having real lighting kind of cycles, and having that the realism there with the lighting model, through like PBR coloring and that kind of thing as well. But I think it's just, yeah, it's all about having really high fidelity work in all your work that you do, and trying to just keep that consistent as well, and try not to let that fall off at any point in the project. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Just kind of a general workflow question. When creating large open world environments such as cities, how much of the work is authored procedurally versus manually? And what kind of procedural tools do you guys use to help with that process?
So I think it's all about your scope. It's all about your timeline for the project and how long you actually have to make these tools. If you're starting an IP or project from scratch, then you maybe have a bit more time. But if you're, for instance, working on a Horizon game that launches every 2 years, then you don't really have that time. So you have to kind of work in iterations, and you can plan for the best and then accept 80% of what you've planned for. And trying to proceduralize everything, from my experiences, it just won't work unless that's the kind of game you're wanting to make. But for like a Horizon game or like another kind of AAA project that's kind of like that, it probably just won't work to proceduralize everything. So you're probably looking at making the assets and then procedurally placing them, rather than procedurally placing them and procedurally making them. But yeah, it really comes down to your scope and knowing what you can make and what you're also willing to accept as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cool. Oh, another question. This one.
I was interested when you said some of the team were generalists and you could move them between disciplines. And I've not worked on a big AAA game before, but it looks interesting. However, you've got a large team and you've sort of taken some of them, made them foliage experts after 2 or 3 years. Are there any negative impact on subsequent projects, or are they going to be doing foliage for forever?
So again, it depends on what the artist wants and whether or not that's what they actually want to do. So a lot of the time we would actually move people from project to project around to each discipline, depending on what they actually wanted to do for that project. So we did have people that did foliage for like 4 Horizon projects, for instance. But then we also had people that came in from like assets, moved over to foliage, then moved over to terrain on the next project. But generally, for the remainder of that project, that's what you're doing. You're working on foliage, you're working on geology, and that's kind of what you're set in for the remainder of the project. It's only until after the project that you could request to move, or you could just stick out if that's what you like doing.
Have you noticed any effects on staff turnover?
No, not for working on not for that reason. I would say. I think generally speaking, I think what I've found is people really enjoy that. It gives the artist a real chance to put everything they have into this one thing and make it really good, rather than having to spread their ability and their time over multiple things. Yeah, I think it gives the artist a real chance to kind of really sink their teeth into something singular, and then the lead environment artist, it's their job to kind of pull all of these things together.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, so how big would this sort of team be that you would have like laid out there? And you mentioned contractors, and do you also do outsourcing? Yeah.
So sorry, is that how big does the team usually get to?
Yeah, like in this example, you were laying out like how much, like how many people would be involved in this.
So again, it depends on the project and the scope and what you want to achieve. And you'd set that kind of standard and concept and find what your headcount needs to be. And then you would hire up and ramp up with contractors, as well as your dedicated environment team that's like a full-time team. I can't remember the exact number, sorry, but on Horizon 5, I think we had between 40 and 50 environment artists. It was the largest team in the studio. Usually is the largest team in the studio for all the projects I've been on. The environment team is usually the largest one. So we have between 40 and 50 at peak production, and then we also have a full outsource team as well. Last chance. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. If you do have any other questions that you don't want to speak publicly about, feel free to come up and talk to me after. Cheers.